Why, hello there. Thanks so much for joining us for the Long Comics Book Club, a bi-weekly podcast about long comics, also known as manga and graphic novels. My name is Shane, and I'm the older brother. I'm joined by Spence, the younger brother. Spence, say hello to the folks at home.
Yes. Hello there, everyone.
If you're new to the show, thanks for joining us. You most likely are new, as this is only episode 2. And we're glad.
Really, episode 1.
Really,
First real
episode 1.
episode.
That's fair. The first episode was much more of an explanation about what we're doing here. If you're interested in that, go back and listen. As for what we're doing today, what we're going to talk about in the first half of the show is going to be about the long comic we read over the past 2 weeks, our reactions to that long comic, some of our takeaways, discussion points, book club things. And for the second part of the show, we'll be chatting about some of the other visual media we've consumed recently. The long comic this week was Goodbye Eri. Looking forward to talking about that one shortly. And to make sure you avoid spoilers, we'll include time codes in the episode description. Of course, by the end of the show, we'll have Spence introduce the next long comic for the next podcast, which will be coming out February 15th. To be notified of when the podcast is out, you can follow our Blue Sky or Instagram at Long Comics Book Club. On that page, you can also find a link to our Discord to join in the conversation, and we'll also have these links up on our link tree as well. And of course, I also want to give a shout out to Vesperia Comics. Spencer is our owner and proprietor of Vesperia Comics, located at 1935 West Broadway in Vancouver, British Columbia. Any updates from the shop, Spence?
Yeah, we got a ton of new manga based on the currently airing animes, including Anyway, I'm Falling in Love with You, Medalist, Headhunter to Another World, Shangri-La Frontier, and 100 Girlfriends. And then, yeah, we previously already had the Apothecary Diaries and Dr. Stone, so most of the big ones this season. If I can get the Viz Media to work and finally get the copies of Solo Leveling we've been waiting for, we pretty much have all the big ones.
Fingers crossed for you.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. Solo Leveling is a manga. Both Solo Leveling, Apothecary Diaries, and 100 Girlfriends we actually talked about on episode 1. So if you're interested in hearing our thoughts about those, you could also go back and listen to that as well. You can also get all these updates from Vesperia Comics, from Vesperia Manga and Comics on Instagram. You can also check out their website, VesperiaComics.com, and they do have Canada-wide shipping. So check it out. Now, moving from there, we are going to talk about our first long comic of the podcast, which is Goodbye Eri. This is a single volume manga with story and art by Tatsuki Fujimoto. We had a small plot summary for this last week, which I actually really liked, and we summarized it as a boy making a movie and the complex nature of his filmmaking. This is also the time that we will call out spoilers ahead. Because it is a single manga volume, it's very quick to get into spoilers.
Yeah.
So
it's effectively impossible to talk about this without it going into spoilers, because by about page 4, we've already hit, like, weirdness.
we're already getting into, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The plot quickly jumps in. So if you are interested, you haven't read ahead yet, this is your opportunity to look at those time codes, make sure you skip ahead, and then to come back and listen to our discussion for some of the ideas and thoughts and themes and things we noticed and thought were worth discussing further. One thing with Goodbye Eri, just to add in a couple of trigger warnings around suicide as well as loss. So just an FYI when it comes to Goodbye Eri, so that you're prepared in case those could impact you. So Spence, kicking us off, why did you choose Goodbye Eri for our first long comic?
Well, I think it's, to start with, I really wanted to start with a single volume thing. And really can't, like, it's, in terms of a single, well-contained story, it really can't be beat. And did you happen to look up who Tatsuki Fujimoto is?
I did no background research on this.
So actually, out of curiosity, do you have any idea who Tatsuki Fujimoto might be?
On the back, it does say that they made Chainsaw Man.
Yeah, so that's the writer of Chainsaw Man.
Yeah.
And noticeably, he made this between big break in Chainsaw Man, and this came out during that break. So, like, of him trying to do slightly more, like, experimental stuff. And I think it would just be interesting to see what you would think of that kind of thing.
I would say I'm very into it. I am very curious. So it sounds like this is an outlier in terms of what mangas usually do.
Oh
Uh,
yes.
and so I realized I should have mentioned this earlier, but the point of this podcast is sort of my re-education of manga and graphic novels, not having engaged with it for a long period of time. And so I wasn't sure if this is what most things look like now. If that's not the case, and this is an outlier, that's too bad because I loved this. I thought
Yeah.
there it was super interesting, super cool, really emotional, and that there's a lot of depth to it for being so short. What makes it really so what when you think of experimental, what really makes this special for you? What made you think of this right away?
Because as you probably noticed from watching Chainsaw Man, Tatsuki Fujimoto absolutely loves films. And I thought it did a really cool job of like taking manga, the medium of manga, and like transforming it using the medium of film. So like obviously it's not a movie, but like it has that unique part of like you could never make this as a movie. Like you
Hmm.
couldn't adapt this. It like wouldn't function. Like people say like something's unadaptable and they like mean oh like it's too complex or too cerebral or it's too weird. But this is like the very medium it's on is such an important part of how this story works.
I was certainly thinking about that as I was reading it, that there's no way that you could adapt this, that you couldn't
Yeah.
adapt this to being a film or a television show. It's just very unique for the format that it's in, which does make it really special, and I think is a great reason to start with this as the first manga that we read because that's the position that it stands in. And that is interesting about it makes sense that he loves film. You certainly see that reflected. So then now that we're into actually talking about it, expanded plot summary. So Yuta makes a movie at his mother's request of her in her dying days or months. It's not really clear how long a period of time it is.
Yeah, I think it's implied to be months because it goes like beyond just like her in the hospital. Like it
Hmm.
begins long before then. So yeah,
Hmm.
an
Yeah.
undefined but long amount of time.
Yeah. And then you have the classes react. Then we learn that this is a movie that he screened at his school's cultural assembly. So he then starts movie number two, which is Goodbye Airy.
Yes, but I think we really should point out the fact that he ends the movie though with a big explosion.
Yes, he ends his mother's,
Yes.
what does he call it? Explosion, mother death?
Yeah.
Uh,
And causes everyone to just kind of like look at him strange of like, what you doing,
yeah,
man?
yeah, gets absolutely uh, made fun of by everyone.
Yeah.
Dead Explosion Mother. That's what he named
Yeah.
his film. Yeah.
Yes. Because yes,
Mm-hmm.
because yeah, because at the end of the film, rather he doesn't actually film his mother's final moments. Instead, he ends it with a big explosion.
Mm-hmm.
And then that causes everyone to like question what he's doing, and everyone hates his film basically, except one girl named Ari, who seems to like doesn't think it's good, but sees like something special in what he's doing
Mm-hmm.
and thinks he should try to make another one.
Yeah. And I thought that that was a good first introduction of the theme of loss and like how people cope with loss. Because clearly his is to do this explosion and to go sort of over the top and try and use a camera to get distance between him and that emotion. And then I think it's then also the audience, the other students not knowing how to react to loss as well, and then
Yeah.
finding it comical and not taking it seriously. But
Yes.
this is so I guess certainly plots a bulk of what we're going to talk about. But something else that I also want to talk about is the art, just because you sort of talked about how really it can only be done in manga. And so recognizing it's therefore a visual medium, I thought it was really interesting the double exposure shots. Do you know what I'm talking about with some of the frames? They're sort of the same image overlaid one on top of the other.
Yeah. Right.
And so
So
it,
yeah, I think trying to make it look like filmier is not a real word, but
mhm.
like that basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's meant to imply motion blur. And so it's really cool because I had to go through it, read it through a couple times, but it was realizing that there was a lot more of that early on. And so, in terms of the way the plot develops, so he has, it's essentially you can think of it as breaking it into three movies, right? Where he has his mom's movie, he has Aries' movie, where the same thing happens it did with his mom, where he films her, except it starts to get a little bit more fantasy and a little bit more complex, but ultimately she allegedly dies as well. And then you have the third film, which technically would be unlabeled, but we'll get into that in a second. And that's him as an older man meeting up with a younger Aerie. And we'll also
Yes.
talk the ending about the ending's also a
Yes.
whole other conversation. But
Yes.
the whole point
Well,
is,
like the whole, how real is that ending is the question.
yeah, we'll work up to that. But it's really cool because looking back through it, so there's a lot of shaky frames in the first one, but all of it is also person point of view. He only ever holds the camera himself. But then after that first explosion, what's of noticeable is that that's actually the first frame we see of him not holding the camera, right? He places
Yeah.
it somewhere and films himself, and that's the first time he isn't holding it when he's making this movie. Then the second one, he has more of those like place it somewhere still shots, but then he also still has some shaky, but not as much. But then by the third one, all of a sudden, that's when you actually first get multiple angles of a conversation. And the third one feels much more cinematic. Like there's much more translatable to filmmaking there. And that I thought was great because it showed that like progression of his movie making through manga, which was really cool and interesting. And ultimately culminating in an incredible finish of after he sees Aerie again and he essentially feels like he gets a new lease on life after talking to her and then he leaves the abandoned house where they had kept on meeting and then it explodes again and the manga's done.
Yeah.
And the first time I read it, it was great because I read that ending and I was like, what is this? What is this is so stupid. Like, what is this ending? How does it end like this? And then I realized that's the whole point
Yeah.
is that it
You've
baits
been
you
played
into
like the students were in the first parts.
exactly. I was played like a fiddle. I was like, that's genius. I didn't see it coming. Did you see that coming the first time you read it?
No, I had no, I like, I had heard about it before as well. I
Mm,
was like, oh, if you like Chainsaw Man, you got to read Goodbye Aries. It's just one book. Like, it takes you like an hour to read. You got to check it out.
yeah.
I get why people were saying that. Like, it's just
There's
so,
some next level stuff going on.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's and it's a perfect ending, which is insane to say that it sort of cuts itself off and ends with an explosion and doesn't answer anything, but that really is the perfect ending for this book. Um, Also, again, the contrast between that first explosion and the last explosion is significant. So the first one is very basic. He just has
Yeah,
explosions. He's running. He's doing his thing.
yeah.
But then at the ending, the contrast when you look at those explosions,
Oh,
you
yeah.
also have way more, you have windows shattering, you have a lot more going on. And again,
Yeah.
I think that's just meant to showcase his growth as a filmmaker,
Yes.
which is super interesting to show the growth of a filmmaker through manga.
Yeah. Well, it's such a unique take on cross median synergy or something. I don't know.
It's media synergy. That's a
Yeah.
good description because I think
Yeah.
that is what it is. So then the big question, which I'm super excited to hear your thoughts on, what happened?
Yes. Is it real? So I guess we should explain. Yeah. So going through we should probably go into more about the second and third parts of the book now, because so the second part of the book involves him, like Aerie convinces him to try to make a movie, and to do that he needs to learn how to make movies by watching movies first. And then he once again tries to do his second movie again, once again goes into a more autobiographical part with elements that are don't yeah. invented elements, even though it's about very much about his life. There are lots of elements that he puts on to Eri, even though he doesn't know if they're true. Implications later do imply that they, in fact, some of his what he aimed for were in fact true.
Interesting. You and I have very take different takes of this book.
Interesting.
So we'll get into that in a second.
Well,
Um,
because I think part of it is so do you how much of this do you think is a movie versus how much of it is real? Air quotes.
right. I think that so what it sounds like, I think the part I want to take away from what you're saying. So you sort of see the entire thing as, do you see the ending as real then? You think that she is a vampire?
I think it okay, this is gonna get really I think it doesn't matter if it's real or not, because it's within the story of itself. So I think by the universe we're given within the story, she is in fact a vampire. Even if it's also like we're getting into like meta narratives now and weird stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because like the story because if you read the book entirely on face value, yes, she is a vampire. Story we're given implies that she is a vampire. And I think it's like so whether this third part is his life or versus his third movie, I think both of those are like an equally valid way of looking at it. It doesn't ultimately matter which of those turns out to be the air quotes truth. Because within the context of the story, they both work and both of them are true.
Because what do you think that, so the point of the story then, from what you're saying, so it doesn't matter because the point is saying that
Well,
the,
it's a coming of age movie from the perspective of a meta narrative movie. Yeah, okay, we're getting really maybe this wasn't the best one to start with because man, we're getting things here getting
no,
complicated.
I think you're making it pretty complicated, which is fair because I think that you've added some extra layers on it for sure. I
Yeah,
think I can explain then how I
yeah. You sure?
see it
Let's
as
get your
well.
interpretation then.
Let's get my interpretation, yeah, because it is quite different than yours. So I think the first thing is to understand that Yuta, our protagonist, is an unreliable narrator. We learn this right away because we find out that he had been disguising facts about his mother, not intentionally, but that he chose to present her in a way, in a positive light, despite her being a pretty terrible human being and a terrible mother. But that was the memory he chose to make. So we learn right away that he is controlling the book that we are reading. And so what I believe, and I will give full due credit to my partner for helping me with some of this as well after she had read it as well, is that the first movie is true. There's no messing around there. So he did try to make a movie of his mother called Explosion, Mother, Death, or whatever it was that I said before. That's legitimate. That's the first one he made. But then the book Goodbye Eri, the book that we have just read, is his is the next movie he makes. That
Okay, so
is both a,
you think there's nothing real in the entire book after the first book, after the
I,
first film? You think none of the rest of the book is like air quotes real. You think it's all a movie from that point forward.
to a degree. It's semi autobiographical, like you said.
Yeah.
Biggest part of note that I think is important is the second portion when he's with Eri, and then she says that she wants him to film her death, and then he supposedly does, but we don't see it, which
Right.
is notable.
Yes.
The other thing is then we have a time jump where he allegedly gets married, has a child, and then subsequently all of them perish tragically in a car accident, and somehow he's the only one alive. But we've never seen the wife and you've never seen the child. Seems unlikely, but technically not impossible. But I am suspicious because we already know he's an unreliable narrator. Then Arya reappears. She's allegedly a vampire. Seems suspicious as well. So what I think it is that I don't think adult Yuta is Yuta. I think that is an actor. So
Okay.
what we suspect is that the idea
Okay.
is
Yeah, so you don't even think there's three movies here. You think there's two movies.
I think
So you
there's
think,
two movies, but that the first movie is also contained within
okay.
the
You think
last
it's
one.
all one movie.
I think it's all one movie within
Interesting.
which you have a true autobiographical start. You still have him meeting Eri, which is true as well. And that's where we learn a little bit more about him. And then it builds into what is ultimately complete fantasy at the end, with Eri still as an actress. And that the recut final version film is the manga.
Hmm.
Whoa.
Yeah, well, like that's the thing. It's so, I guess now this is the good reason why we picked it to start with, because yeah, there's a lot of ways you can interpret it. Because
Mhm.
yes, honestly, that makes sense. That is definitely one way to look at it. Versus if it's all some connection of real versus the story they give is still just as valid if it's not if it's true in universe as if it's just a story, a movie in universe, if you understand what I mean.
Mhm. I
So
think
like,
so. Yes. Like,
yeah,
yeah, no matter whether or not you perceive it as a film or whether or not you perceive it as real, the themes and the impact that it is trying to put through is going to come through either way.
yeah,
And I think that it's also really interesting because of the alleged loss of his whole family and that driving him towards potential suicide. And I think that in that moment for me, I just immediately said, there's no way this is real. And so that's my own reaction to
interesting.
insurmountable loss. So that was my moment where I'm like, this last part is complete fantasy. There's no way this is true. And
Yeah, okay, because when I was reading it, I definitely took it at face value more until we
interesting.
hit that final explosion of like,
Mm,
yeah, until like I guess it was like until they give me a reason to doubt it, or like a very direct reason to doubt it. I would just assume that it's
you
true.
said interesting. So you were on board for the vampire.
Oh yeah, hey man, you could read some
You
weird stuff.
That's true. Um, yeah, I guess I also just think about parts where he talks about like pinch of fantasy as an element of his creative process was this pinch of fantasy,
Yeah,
which is super great. I mean that yeah, I love that there's different ways to interpret this. That it really isn't just a clear cut,
yeah, yeah.
even just
Yeah,
from a basic face value. You can immediately be like, this is just a manga, whereas I'm like, this is an entire film portrayed as a manga. So,
yeah.
uh,
There's definitely because I guess that's the interesting thing. The two of us are looking at it. I'm not quite at the all because you could interpret it as this is 100% a film, like you do, or you can interpret it as none of this is film. He literally just filled up that building with explosives to the end and blew it up because reasons. And obviously, I'm not quite at that point. But like
yeah.
our two interpretations are you're in the 100% movie. I'm in like the 80% real
I
kind
don't know
of.
if I'm comfortable saying 100% movie. I
Okay,
just think
fair.
that this
Yeah.
is my strongest theory, and I think the way that makes the most sense trying to understand it.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that there's
100% semi-autographical movie, maybe.
correct. That
Yeah.
makes more sense. But I think it certainly speaks to a lot of interesting stuff in terms of even just thinking about the power of media and the way
Mhm.
that we choose to present stories and choose to present people and control point of view. And I think that that's certainly always going to be culturally relevant now. And I think that this is a great example of that. And
Yeah. Right.
especially with his
Right. Because
mom, but then even just Ari as well, that he didn't shoot her with glasses or her mouthpiece, allegedly, if she actually even wore those. Who's to say?
yeah. Look, right. Because that's an entire other aspect is presenting someone as the best they could on film versus film does not pick up reality. It picks up an idealized reality, no matter how you want to look at it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a perfect version that we seek of ourselves,
Yeah.
which is super interesting. So then, so then why do you think it's called Goodbye Airy?
That's a good question. Because you could certainly interpret it as his second movie, that would be actually, do they explain? I think they explain that in the book that the second movie is named Goodbye Harry, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah, they do. And that he keeps on recutting it over and over. And that was what he's going to do for the rest of his life. And that he was
Right.
obsessed with recutting it.
Right. And then they specifically call it Goodbye Harry. So
Yeah.
I guess even in interpretation of the story, that it's mostly real. Yeah, the driving force of the film. So
Hmm.
or you can, if you interpret it all as a movie, that would the actual movie would be called Goodbye Harry. So yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. It also would be insane if they had called the book Dead Explosion Mother, because I can't imagine it would sell very well.
Yeah, honestly, mad respect if they did call it Dead Explosion Mother. But
That would
like,
be a
yeah. Well, it's
terrible
like, have you
advertising
ever heard
choice.
of I Want to Eat Your Pancreas?
Ugh, yeah.
Yeah,
I
because it's
don't.
like that's the classic example of like, oh yeah, I guess that works in Japanese, but in English it's like you are not doing yourselves any
Do you
favors.
mean
By
classy or do you mean classic?
classy. I'm sure it works. Like I'm sure just in Japanese it probably like it sounds like something you might call like a deep complex story like that. But
It-
in English it just
I'll
does not
take your
work.
word for it. I don't speak Japanese, but I'll take
Yeah,
your word for that. There's a way to make I want to eat your pancreas sound nice in Japanese.
because apparently it's like an idiom or something. I don't know.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
But I think the Goodbye Area is a good name for this
Oh,
book.
it's a great name for its book. Like, yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. Jumping back to another art question then. So even just from the base levels again. So do you know or do you think this whole book is in black and white? Do you think there's a reason behind that from a technical standpoint where coloring is just so much more expensive, so much more work, or do you think it's done intentionally in black and white?
It's 100% just all mangas in black and white. That's just how it works.
Interesting. Okay, that's
Yeah.
good to know for
Yeah,
me.
yeah. Like absolutely legit question to ask, but like
Oh, well, now I know.
all manga is in black and white basically. It's just how they print it stuff. How manga like is distributed and all that like basically only works in black and white.
Oh.
So yeah, I guess little explanation here. So in Western comics, we buy our little like floppy comic issues, and then those get collected into graphic novels, right?
Hmm.
And then those are typically in color because that's how they print them. But in Japan, how manga is typically done, it's done in like big phone books that have like 30 manga in each of them, and then those are released every week or every month, and then the popular stories of those they get turned into the individual Takabon volumes that we buy.
Oh.
So like Shonen Jump, you've heard of Shonen Jump, no doubt.
Hmm.
Yeah, so like you buy Shonen Jump comes out every week, and it
Hmm.
has the latest chapter of every single Shonen Jump product in it. Yeah, and how that works is they like the only way to economically do that is to print everything in black and white. You can't print an entire phone book worth of comics.
Or, yeah,
Like, yeah, it would be impossible in color.
that would destroy the
Yeah.
printing. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So are you saying that this was part of a phone book collection or
I think actually this one was done online as a web novel or as a web manga. I should look this up. This is probably yeah. So yeah, it was a Shonen Jump Plus manga. So it was their Shonen Jump like online stuff, and I think it's so probably it could have been in color if they wanted to, but it's so ingrained in the
Hmm,
system because
yeah.
also it's like for a Western comic, there's typically four people who do like the artist in a Western comic is actually like four people because you have to have someone to do the right like inking, penciling, coloring are all separate disciplines.
Hmm.
So if it's just one person do it, it's basically impossible for them to do a full color thing in any reasonable time scale. Time
Hmm.
scale.
Wait, so did Tatsuki Fujimoto do all of the four things you just named?
Well, the thing is, he doesn't have to if you're doing it in black and white.
Oh, I
Like you
see.
don't need to color it. Penciling it is so much simpler if it's all. Yeah, inking it is so much more straightforward. He probably does have a. He's famous enough to have
A team
person
of
to
supports.
a team
Yeah.
sport to like fill in the black and put in the different tones and stuff. But
Hmm.
it's much more straightforward to do with one person versus yeah.
Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. What I'm learning so much.
Yes,
You
exactly.
know,
That's what this is for.
also to be clear, we are not experts on this. These are
No.
things that have learned through osmosis and over time, but
Yes. I do own a comic book store, so I would like to assume I know slightly more than the average person. But
that's
yes,
true.
I have never worked on a comic book. I have never, everything I have heard is from reading, everything I know is from reading, yeah, stuff like
The
this.
material in your store and
Yeah, retailer in my
etc.
store. Yeah. Reading the back pages of those graphic novels, and they always have like the full explanations on how all that stuff
Oh,
works.
there you go.
Yeah.
Learning it happening in the store every day. Wow. But yeah, Goodbye Eri, super great. Really cool introduction.
Yeah.
Really liked it a lot. Clearly a lot to think about, a lot to I think it's the kind of thing that would be fun to go back to after a while as well. Read it again, see what
Yeah.
other things you notice, pick up on. There's certainly some foreshadowing in there that I missed the first time through. There's some really well slid in parts, especially around Ares' alleged illness. I'm
Yeah.
gonna keep on alleging things
Yeah.
because to what
So fair.
degree I
You can put
trust
yeah
anything.
alleged before like
It's true.
every sentence you explain in this movie or this book
Just keep on
movie.
saying
Yeah,
allegedly.
alleged.
Yeah. But the art's really interesting and really great. So it is
Yeah.
realism based, but that you have the film quality to it, like you said, with some of these double exposures, almost like shaky cam stuff. And it is a coming of age story because it
Yeah.
starts with a 12-year-old and um, ends with a older man, like a
Yeah.
literal coming of age story over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was
Yeah.
great.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Was
Yeah.
there anything else in there that you wanted to talk about with Goodbye Eri?
No, I think we covered most of the big points I wanted to bring up. I think yeah. Even though
Hmm,
we spoil even if you've gotten this far and you've never read it and we spoiled everything for you, read it yourself because maybe you'll have your own interpretation of
100%.
yeah.
Yeah, maybe there's things that you've picked up on that we might have missed or specific moments that really stick with you.
Yeah.
It is really a rewarding read. I think it's, like you said, it only takes an hour. And depending on how emotionally invested you get in media, do take care of yourself around this one. Because as there's some heavy stuff in there with loss and
Yeah.
um, suicide, and so some difficult topics, but handled really well, really
Yeah.
healthily.
Yes.
And
Certainly it's classy about it. It's not doing it for shock value.
no, despite the
Yes,
dead
despite
explosion
the
mother.
amount despite the amount of shock value in that story, the deeper themes are not done for that. Yeah.
Hmm. I think that's really interesting that there is shocking stuff in there, but that it's not done for shock value. That the
Yeah.
shocking nature of it is the purpose of the commentary, and that
Yeah.
you then see the students reacting to the shocking nature of it
Yeah.
is great. Really, really interesting. And certainly not like something I've read before, but yeah, I'm gonna be thinking about this one for a while.
Absolutely.
So, what other kinds of content have you been enjoying this week? Any movies, TV shows, games, or books that have stood out to you?
Something possessed me. I watched the 1972 counterculture classic Felix the Cat the other night.
Okay.
You ever heard of that one?
I am aware of Felix the Cat as a character, but is it a long film? You said film, right?
Oh wait. Oh sorry. Did I? No, sorry. No, not Felix the Cat. Fritz the Cat. Completely different movie.
Okay, I was thinking about the black and white
Yeah,
cat.
no.
And I was
So
like,
Yeah, Felix the Cat's the black and white thing. Fritz the Cat is a Ralph Bakshi movie from the 1970s, which is like it was the first animated movie to get an X rating.
yikes.
Yeah, and
How was it?
it was very weird. It's like it's one of those things where you're watching and you're like, they're clearly trying to say something here, but like I don't know.
but
The
you don't know
fact
what it is.
I don't know what it is, and this is so far removed from like I'm not a person from the 1960s, so it's like I don't know what I'm watching. Probably
What?
racist in some way, but
Oh no. Okay. So it sounds like this is not a film you would recommend to people.
honestly, it's probably the recommendation is like it is certainly an important film in the history of film.
Is it?
It's it's like have you ever watched Gone with the Wind?
No.
Okay, well, Gone with the Wind's also not a very good movie. I'm going to be honest here.
Oof.
I know. Talking big mad smack about the number one movie from 1938. But like but it's like watching it now you're like, "Oh my God, really?" But then you got to remember, "Oh, this is a very important film in the context of like history."
Yeah,
So like you got to
but
watch it. No, and so it's like it's. I would recommend everyone should watch Gone with the Wind once. If it wasn't, it's 4 hours long. So like I know that's not going to be recommending a 4 hour long movie on the basis of it's important. Like historically, is kind of a
mhm.
hard sell. And this one's only
Yeah,
17 and 2 minutes, so it's like more of a
it's
like
17 minutes?
72 minutes,
72. Okay.
72 minutes, and it's like a super important film for like
Is
anime.
it?
But no, because like of like
I
the
just want to take a moment and
counterculture
acknowledge.
underground comics from the 1970s, that
Right.
era. And like
Okay.
so this is like the movie version of one of those.
Right. So from a counter, so if you're into cult films, this is important to
Yes.
watch. You are
Yes.
not trying to put Fritz the Cat
On the
in the
same book.
annals of history on the same pedestal as Gone with the Wind.
No. But honestly, in terms of quality of movie, no, okay, no. It's not no.
No, it's not. I can't imagine it. This
Yeah.
X-rated cat cartoon
This
in a
X-rated cat.
4 hour.
Yeah.
That's very funny though. Okay.
How about you?
I am not going to watch Fritz the Cat
Yeah,
based on the
probably fair enough.
recommendation, but
On Amazon Prime for free for anyone who wants to watch it.
okay, well that's a strong selling point other than boo Jeff Bezos. But
Yes.
alas, if you're
Yeah.
gonna have the subscription
If you're gonna have
anyways,
the subscription
make
anyway.
use of it. Okay, good to know. Fritz the Cat available online. I have been watching a couple things recently. Something that I thought was great. I've only done the first two seasons, but Mob Psycho 100.
Ah, yes.
Trying to remember if you've seen this or you've read the manga.
I've seen it. I haven't read the manga.
Okay, you have seen it.
I have seen it, yes.
So great.
Yeah.
Really, really good.
Well, once again, you're aware of the author's other work?
I am not.
Oh, it's done by the same guy as One Punch Man.
Oh, I did know this. Yes, and
Yeah.
that's why there's stylistic calls to one another. But Mob
Yes.
Psycho 100 being about Mob, who has supernatural powers, and he's a young kid, and he's extremely powerful and learning how to navigate both his superpowers as well as his emotions. And I think that my favorite thing that really makes it stand out is the art style. I think
Yes.
that there's
It
something
is one of the best looking animes in.
which is so interesting, right? Because it's way less conventional. It's not going for the hyper realism that you have with a bunch of shows with like your like Spy X Families or your even the exact opposite of Demon Slayer where it's beautiful colors and super deep
Yeah.
inks. It's like a little bit scribbly, a little bit rough around the edges, but that makes it so clearly distinct and different. And I can only think of one other show which sort of hits that same mark, which is season one of Tower of God, where it's
Mm.
just is very stylistically different, which
Yeah,
makes it
honestly,
really
that's a really
cool.
good one to compare it to. Like
Yeah,
in
and it's
terms of
too bad they
visuals.
didn't make a season two of Tower of God. That they
Just like they
only
didn't
made
make a
the
season
one.
two of One Punch Man.
I don't mind season two of One Punch Man. It's
I think the season two of One Punch Man is worse than season two of Tower of God, honestly.
I hard disagree. But that's I think it's also just because I had higher expectations of season two of Tower of God.
Fair. Yeah.
Whereas season two of One Punch Man, I just expected action. It just wasn't as good action.
Yeah.
Whereas Tower of God had this great, really interesting plot. So it's about Bam trying to find Rachel in this magical tower, and he has to ascend the tower, and there's a bunch of mystery and stuff going on with it. And season two falls off so hard. It made me so sad because I loved season one, and I'd rewatched it in anticipation of season two. and it's just so
Uh,
much worse. But Mob Psycho 100, amazing. I still need to finish season 3, but I loved
yes.
it. The other thing I wanted to quickly throw in because I think it's super interesting is Queer Eye. You don't watch Queer Eye, I think, but
No, I don't watch reality TV pretty much, period.
that's understandable. It's not a genre for everyone. I don't either, with the exception of Queer Eye. I think is it's one of those feel good shows. It's not particularly deep. It's a life makeover show with 5 queer men. But what I think was super interesting this season, I assume you had no idea this happened,
No,
but
I had heard I remember Queer Eye the Straight Guy from back when I was like 12 or whenever that came out, and then I remember hearing that they had brought it back as
mhm,
just Queer Eye not that long, like I don't know, half a decade ago at this point.
yeah.
And yeah, so
Well, if you're ever wanting to watch something feel good, Queer Eye is great. But what's super interesting about it is that you have uh, the Fab Five, who are each responsible for their different areas, right? And
sure,
so
yeah.
you have
Yeah,
the
I
one.
guess I should admit, my entire understanding of Queer Eye entirely comes from the mad parody of Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, circa 2006. So
Okay,
probably not the most, but I understand the basic understanding of it. But yeah,
yeah, but I think this is funny enough that I'm going to take the time to explain this to you because you have the guy who does fashion. So he looks through their entire wardrobe, gives them a full new wardrobe. You have the person who does style, so helping with them with like new haircut, but also like new skincare routines, bunch of new products, etc. You have culture, which is talking to them, helping them get in touch with their emotions, do activities, getting into questionable zone. You have food where the guy teaches them how to cook something.
sure.
And then you have design who remodels their entire house. Can you guess which of the five has an unjust level of workload?
Ah, well, clearly the guy, culture has to go through so much emotional
Yeah,
journey with them that clearly that's
culture
the
goes
hardest
through it.
one.
Yeah. Um, Design gets absolutely decimated compared to the other four.
Oh
There's a
yeah, no doubt.
really, really funny one recently that food invited them over and they made scrambled eggs together, whereas design guy had to remodel the whole house. So because of this extremely unbalanced workload, the last design guy actually left.
Oh
So
wow.
his name was Bobby. He full was like, I'm done. It's not fair. I am absolutely overworked. So he actually fully legitimately left the show. And so why I wanted to bring this up is one, because I think it's funny that I was able to explain this to you, not being familiar with the show, but how they navigate a replacement of a host is really interesting and really well done in the most recent season because they actually acknowledge it. They don't pretend that this just like was how it always was. And part of the whole thing is this new design guy talking about his experiences as being new in this role.
Hmm.
And it is handled really well. And I think that it's the kind of thing I feel like I've seen in other shows where it's just not smoothly done. And they're just like, even just thinking about recasting in shows where they just like don't mention it and they just pretend everything's the same
Yeah,
and it
that's
doesn't work.
yeah. Wasn't it some famous like on like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air or something? They just replaced the mom with like a completely different actress and never acknowledged it.
Yeah, it's the kind of,
Yeah.
well, even just thinking about like subsequent like movie sequels that just aren't as popular, right? Like I feel like the Home Alone kid got replaced. And
Um. Yes.
uh
Yes. So in Home Alone 1 and 2, it's Macaulay Culkin. In Home Alone 3, it's actually completely it's not Kevin McAllister anymore.
mhm.
But it's Home Alone either 4 or 5, one of them, it's once again Kevin McAllister, but played by a different actor. And also this
Yeah,
movie came in like 2007, so like really
exactly.
who are they kidding?
Yeah, so that's exactly my point that it's like why it can be so poorly done, but in this case it was I thought really smooth. They did a cool transition. They introduced this new guy and he seems to be okay with the extremely unfair work balance so far. And is emotionally moved a lot. It's an emotionally moving show, but I always recommend Queer Eye for anyone who wants a happy, feel good watch. But there you go. Those are the only things I will bring up this week in terms of what's worth checking out. So
Yeah.
I'd say we're now just winding down towards the end of the episode, but of course we need to introduce what's next on the reading docket. So Spence, what do the fine folks at home and I get to look forward to reading next?
Okay, so I figured, you know what? Let's take a step back, not go quite as cerebral and all that, and you know what? We're right. So we're doing a graphic novel for this one, as opposed to a manga volume. You know, I figured let's start with some superheroes. We can go into the more like the Vertigo, indie, all that stuff. But you know what? For our first one, let's do some superheroes, but also let's start at the very top. So we're going to be doing Hawkeye: My Life as a Weapon, which is the first volume of the Matt Fraction Hawkeye run. Like I could just say we're going to do Hawkeye, and everyone knows exactly. If everyone who knows comics is going to know exactly what we're talking about. Like this is an absolute legendary run of Hawkeye. It's far and away the absolute best, like possibly one of the best, because it's about Hawkeye not being Hawkeye.
I am so intrigued because I
Yes.
always my context for Hawkeye, like I imagine most people, is the Avengers,
Yes.
and he does not seem that interesting.
Nope, and that's
So
part of it. So like this is the plot is basically it's about Hawkeye. He buys an apartment building in New York, becomes a landlord there, and just kind of hangs out. It's about all the stuff going on as him just hanging out as like being a kind of schlubby landlord.
sounds like a classic superhero book. I
Yeah,
am
but
intrigued.
yes, I assume you never watched that Disney Plus Hawkeye show. I didn't either.
No.
Yeah, because apparently they tried to bring in aspects of this into that show, but it just didn't really work because the MCU Hawkeye is so different from uh comic book Hawkeye.
Oh, cool.
So
Okay.
yeah,
Well, I'm excited. This is Hawkeye. My life is a living weapon, you said?
uh, My Life as a Weapon.
My life
It's
is a
really
weapon,
yeah.
not a living
Hawkeye
weapon.
Matt
Okay.
Fractions Volume One. So Matt Fractions is the writer. He took over in like yeah, I think it was like 2003 or something like that.
All
Uh,
right.
yeah.
Okay. Then that's what we'll get to look forward to. So Hawkeye, My Life as a Weapon, Matt Fractions Volume 1 is going to be our February 15th podcast graphic novel. And you can order that at VesperiaComics.com for pickup at Vesperia Manga and Comics if you're in the Lower Mainland of beautiful British Columbia, or you can also order that for Canada-wide shipping. But of course, we realize that buying a new book every 2 weeks isn't always financially viable for everyone, so consider inviting a friend to split costs, or borrowing a book from a friend, or visiting the local library if it's available, or if you are international, hello, thanks for joining us. Maybe check out your local comic book or manga store to see if they have Hawkeye, My Life as a Living. I don't want to keep saying living
My
weapon.
Life as a Weapon.
My Life as a Weapon, Volume 1
Yeah.
by.
Or yeah, Hawkeye 2012 Volume 1 is also away.
Oh, this is making it very confusing.
Yeah, I know. It's you know what? Walk up to someone who knows anything about comic books and say, "Can I have Hawkeye 1?" And there's a reasonable chance they would give you this one.
No, but okay. Otherwise, it is Hawkeye, My Life is a Weapon, Matt. What's his name?
Fraction.
Matt Fraction, Volume 1. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's it for episode 2 of the Long Comics Book Club. Thank you so much for listening. You can follow us on Blue Sky or Instagram for updates, as well as join our Discord to share your own thoughts to Goodbye Airy. Or you can also jump on there and let us know what you thought of Hawkeye, My Life as a Weapon in advance of the February 15th podcast. Until then, I've been Shane. That's been Spence. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you then.
See ya.
Bye.